Hey guys, so I've noticed this channel has been growing a lot faster than I ever expected. So if you guys actually enjoy these videos, please make sure to subscribe for more of these. If you guys want to submit your stories, I have my Gmail I listed in the description below. Anyways, hope you guys enjoy. Back in the 80s, my Aunt Kay was in her early 20s. This was before she married my uncle, and when she would do long drive distances back and forth between her parents and my uncles to visit. It was a transitional period for them. He had just graduated and she hadn't moved out yet to be with him. It was a long drive across several states through the desert, which took her hours. This desolate highway would have stretches of road that lasted hundreds of miles where you quite often wouldn't see another driver, let alone another gas station. So Aunt Kay set out and began one of these journeys. A couple hours into her drive, she noticed a dark vehicle slowly catching up to her. She barely noticed as she continued to sing along to her song until the vehicle got aggressively close. She turned off the music and looked into the rearview mirror, seeing the vehicle flash its brights and a hand pointing at her car and motioning to pull over. Alarmed, she quickly slowed down and began to look for a good place to pull off the road to see what must be wrong with the car. The second she began to pull off the road, she said she felt and heard as clear as day, "Don't pull over." Then again, stronger, "Don't pull over." Call it God, intuition, or just a gut feeling, but a jolt of adrenaline and fear shot through my aunt's body as she hit the gas and peeled back out onto the highway. Her heart pumping, she silently asked herself what the hell was that as she saw the vehicle peel out behind her. The dark vehicle continued to closely follow, flashed their brights and motioned her to pull over. Fear and confusion set into my aunt, began to question what was going on. Why was the driver motioning for her to pull over? Was there something wrong with her car? And what the hell was that warning she felt? It would have been a severe situation if her car broke down out there, especially before cell phones, but she pressed on. She started questioning if she truly did feel what she felt. She started slowly backing down when the dark vehicle picked up speed. It entered into oncoming traffic lane and came level to my aunt's car. The driver smiled, pointed, motioned, and mouthed the words, "Pull over," to my aunt. She said the second she looked into his eyes, she felt pure evil. She felt a horribly sick feeling into the pit of her stomach and again heard the words in her head, "Don't pull over." She described him as looking scary, greasy, and noticed he was missing a couple teeth in his smile that she will never forget. That sent chills through her. This quickly dispelled any thoughts she had of pulling over, and she sped off to try to lose him. He chased after her. She slowed down. He slowed down. She sped up. He sped up. It got to the point that he began to try to push her car off the road. My aunt was to the point of tears as this creep continued to terrorize her alone, out in the middle of nowhere. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, my aunt sees a couple of semis off in the distance. She felt that if only she could get close or even get in between those trucks, she would feel safe, so she took off. He continued to flash his lights, honk his horn, and try to hit her car until she got close enough to the trucks. As she got in between them, she saw the dark vehicle slow way down and eventually disappear from view. She stayed with the trucks for a couple hours until she felt safe enough to pull over at a gas station and cry. Fast forward several years, my aunt and uncle got married. He's working at a law firm as a high-profile criminal prosecutor in Las Vegas. She's now a full-time mom of several young children. Since I've known my aunt, she's been obsessed with true crime. Dateline 2020 and Unsolved Mysteries were always playing at their house. This day was no different. She was folding laundry in the kitchen while listening to the TV in the other room. The interviewer was talking about a man who was being interviewed on death row. As she paired another match of socks, she heard the man describe one of his tactics for procuring victims. According to him, he would wait along the side of the highway. A car would go by with the family and he'd wait. Another car with the male driver would go by and he'd wait. But every so often a car would go by with the pretty woman driving alone. So I'd pull out behind and follow him. I'd flash my brights, honk, and motion for them to pull over. My aunt was paralyzed as she continued to listen. When they would eventually pull over, I'd tell them to pop up the hood and I'd be able to tell them what was wrong with their car. They would, and I'd yank a couple wires. When the car wouldn't start, I'd tell them no problems, my buddy has a shop next town. I can give you a ride and he can give you a fair deal. My aunt slowly moved to the living room. They'd get in, and I'd rape him and kill him. Then I'd bury him anywhere in the desert. When asked how many times he did this, he responded, "They'll never find all the bodies. I can't even count. And how many got away? 2 or 3? My aunt stood alone, staring into the same toothless grin she saw on the highway that day. The serial killer turned out to be Henry Lee Lucas. He died in 2001 after serving almost 20 years in prison. The year was approximately 1998 to 1999. I was a young gay man in my early 20s living in a medium-sized city in the Midwestern US. This was sort of an in-between transitional time for gay people, where in most areas we had enough respect to live openly, but there were still plenty of people who did not like us. It was well before the invention of smartphones, and the internet was still in the early stages of mass adoption. There were large communities online, but it was not yet at the point where most Americans were online. Online socialization consisted of chat rooms hosted by various services like AOL, Yahoo, or IRC servers, and message boards were still in use by large numbers of people. For gay men at the time, it was nothing short of revolutionary. Prior to the internet and to the broader of cultural changes, gay men had been stuck looking for fun in secretive and/or shady places due to the inability to freely express ourselves. In the 90s, it was still somewhat risky, but the internet offered a way to talk freely and relatively anonymously without the risk of being outed or worse. For this reason, it really took off in the gay communities, and gay men were a very large part of the user bases for these social platforms. It was suddenly very easy and relatively safe to find dates, friends, or just sex, and it quickly became the norm for a lot of gay men. On the other hand, being an attractive young man in my prime, I made liberal use of online communities to find dates. That is to say, I had plenty of hookups. My city had a decent number of chat rooms and personnel's message boards, and I had mostly great experiences. I met the typical assortment of good guys, closet cases, and weirdos that you'd expect. I wasn't an absolute hoe by most standards, but suffice to say that a cute gay guy at the time could generally have a lot more dates than your typical straight person. At some point during this time, I had some brief chat on a message board with some guy from my city. I forgot his screen name as it's been over 20 years, so let's call him Slim Guy 65. This back and forth had happened on a general thread in the gay section, not in private messages, so it was visible to anyone who chose to read that thread. Nothing had came out of it, but a week later I received an email from an unrecognized address. The email basically said, "Hey, I'm not gay and I don't agree with the gay lifestyle. I'm here because my friend met this Slim Guy 65 person from this message board and the guy really hurt him. I don't want this happen to anyone else. My friend tried to tell the police, but they wouldn't do anything. I see you were talking to Slim Guy 65, so just be careful and stay away from him." Okay, that's strange. What does this person mean by really hurt him? Was his heart broken? Did he get beaten up or verbally abused or what? I responded to the email asking for clarification on what exactly happened. I never received a response. I was slightly weirded out by it, but on the other hand, it's an anonymous email from someone who doesn't respond and is vague about their warning. This could be anything. It could be some disgruntled ex trying to mess with the guy. It could be a real warning about someone gay bashing. It could be someone trolling who doesn't have anything to do with anyone. I kept it in the back of my mind, but pretty much I just shrugged it off. Several weeks later, I had a weekday off from work and decided to take the internet to fish for some dick. Lo and behold, I had an email response to a personal ad. It was Slim Guy 65. He was offering to meet at his place to hang out and just having a good time. I won't go into the details, as I recall there weren't really many details discussed other than small talk and intros we'd done previously. Nothing about this guy was really interesting to me, but I had no other offers on this day, so I decided why not. I'll go see what this dude is about. As I typed my reply, I suddenly remembered the strange email I received warning about this person. I went back and reread it. Still vague, still presenting more questions and no answers. Should I take this anonymous warning at face value and just ignore Slim Guy 65? I decided to go check him out anyways. His address was on a rather busy street and in the middle of a dense residential area and not some shack out in the woods. And I can handle myself. If he's weird, I can just get the fuck out of there. Before long, I arrived at the house at the agreed time. It was a duplex style house with one apartment on the ground floor and one on the second floor, part of a row of several identical duplexes. It was the middle of the afternoon and there was plenty of traffic on the street and the occasional person out on the porch or in their backyard. I pulled up in the driveway to the parking area behind the house, got out and knocked on the door. The guy that answered was pretty normal, kind of mousy looking man, probably in his 40s. Slight, slim, build, soft-spoken, looked like any guy working in an office cubicle somewhere. Not really my type, but honestly my curiosity was piqued, and I had nothing better to do. So I stepped inside to take a look around and gauge the situation, with the warning email still fresh in my mind. I stepped into the back door, into the kitchen. It was very clean and there was nothing out of the counters, and no table and chairs or anything. That is to say, it did not look like someone was living there. It had been kept up and clean, but looked empty. Looking out in the apartment, I could see that it was not set up as a living space. A large window with sliding glass was between the kitchen and living room, and I could see what looked like a large table out in the living room area. Slim Guy 65 said something like, "This isn't where I live. A friend of mine used to run a doctor's office here. I maintain the building for him. It's private though. We have the place to ourselves." He shut the back door and locked it with the keyed deadbolt, the kind that you need a key to open, even from the inside, and he put his keys in the back of his pocket, saying, "So what do you want to do?" At this point my danger sense spiked. This is not a normal home, and why is he locking the door like that? It's not necessarily suspect. A lot of people have that sort of lock on the door, and the door has a window, so it even makes sense, but still. Something is not right here. I can't tell, and now I'm locked in. I asked him why he was locking the door like that, which immediately flustered him. He was looking rather nervous and his voice was a little wavery and halting, not quite stuttering, but almost. He said, well, we don't want someone to come in and interrupt us, right?" Flashing a weak, unconvincing smile. His demeanor and body language were all I needed to confirm that this guy was up to no good, or at least there was something that he was hiding. However, I could tell I was intimidating him. I was not a particularly muscular kid, but I have a larger frame. Like even when I'm at my very thinnest, I will still wear a size L tops and waist 36 waist pants, so I look big, which people tend to think that I'm being stronger than I really am. Also, I'm not a tough guy at all, but I have a resting facial expression that makes me look like a badass thug. People who don't know me often assume that I'm rough or something. I sometimes use this to my advantage while I can, because before long a new acquaintance will eventually figure out that I'm a total wimp. But this was definitely an occasion to play up the tough guy appearance, and I did exactly that. I put on my best steely face and told him to unlock the door and that I don't want to be locked in here. He looked for a moment like he was going to pee his pants, and then he said, "Okay, alright, I'll unlock this." He then unlocks the deadbolt. "And I'll just lock the knob here." And he turned the little dial that locks the doorknob. That was fine with me. I continued to stare at him until he said, "I'll leave the keys on the counter right here." And he set his keys down near the sink. I was relatively satisfied with that answer. At this point though, my adrenaline was flowing. I was almost in full flight or fight mode, but I was kinda stuck in this place. The guy was between me and the door and I was freaked out, but this little weasel did not appear to pose any immediate physical threat to me. I could tell that his pant pockets were empty and that I was intimidating the living hell out of him. I didn't know yet exactly what to do. Now, to keep in mind that despite my wordy description, this all happened very quickly without any really long pauses. It had only been about maybe 1 or 2 minutes since I stepped in the door. This all happened at the pace of a conversation. This guy was obviously nervous and trying not to appear so. He said, "Well, let's go in," and walked in a wide path around me through the kitchen into what would normally be the living room and toward the hall to the right from there. I was familiar with this floor layout. It is very common in this area. The hallway would lead to 2 small bedrooms with the bedroom in between them. I hesitated, thinking I should just walk out back to the door and take off. But really, now I was super curious. I knew there's no way in hell I'm doing anything with this guy, but I kinda want to see what's going on in here. Also, I'm confident that he can't take me if it comes to a fight, so I slowly headed towards the living room. It felt like I was walking in slow motion. From the kitchen entrance, I could see a large rectangular stainless steel table taking up a lot of the living room. I remember thinking this looks like a surgical table. It looked like it could rinse and tilt, and it had a recessed channel running all the way around the edge. In hindsight, I now know what that means. It was 100% a mortician's table, but at the time I thought it looked like a medical table of some sort. There's some other office type cabinets and stuff around, I think, but now all I really remember is the table in that room. The large front window looking out onto the street was covered by vertical blinds that were closed. Slim Guy 65 says something like, "This used to be a doctor's office, like I said. Come on back here." The hallway revealed the room setup that I expected. The first bedroom door was closed. The second door was open to a small, very clean bathroom. At the end of the hall was the other bedroom, which looked like, if the doctor's office story was true, had at one time been converted to an exam room. He said, "We can go in that room if you want. Go ahead and take a look." And he stayed by the other closed bedroom door. The back bedroom door was open, and I could see that the walls were covered in a honey-colored wood paneling, the type you might see in a den or office that hasn't been updated since the early 1970s. I slowly took a few steps down to that door, trying to be very aware of what Mr. Creepy was doing behind me. He didn't move. When I got up to that room, the first thing I noticed was the door had a key deadbolt lock, like the back door. This room is locked from the outside. I wonder if there was a lever on the inside, but I pretty much knew the answer to that question without needing to check. I also saw a chair, a non-swiveling plastic desk chair with the thin metal legs sitting near the center of the room. The room had old, dark carpet and those wood-paneled walls. I noticed that the walls were completely paneled with no windows, and I know that the room had at least 1 window, probably 2, so whoever did the paneling went over the windows. There was also a phone in there, plugged in and sitting on the floor. It was an old office phone, probably from around the 80s or early 90s. Dingy, beige plastic with several buttons to manage different phone lines, just sitting on the carpet near the wall with the chair at a slight distance facing the phone. There was nothing else in that room. I was standing at the threshold of that room with 1 foot slightly in, absolutely not going past that door. I looked back at the dude and he was still standing by that other door, just nervously smiling at me, trying hard to look casual, but obviously very nervous, or something. He said something like, "Well, what do you want to do?" Instead of answering, I felt around the backside of the deadbolt lock. Sure enough, nothing there but the smooth wood of the door. It also dawned on me that I did not see a light switch anywhere for the ceiling lamp. Where was the switch? Who knows? It should have been just inside the door, of course, but that original switch was covered by the paneling. He mumbled something about not having the key to that lock. Don't worry about it. I turned back to face the guy and just said, "What is it that you want to do here?" My skin had gone ice cold as I realized that I was way too far into this apartment. I was running through my options in my head. What is this guy going to do? He doesn't appear to have any weapons or anything in reach, but who the fuck knows what's going on in this place? What are you trying to do? He was almost totally derailed by that. He stammered out, "Some hot man-to-man fun?" With the weakest smile I've ever seen, looking like he's just a hair's breadth away from panicking. That sounds comical, but really that sentence was probably the most chilling part out of the experience for me. It was probably the way he said it, like he had to come up with something on the fly, something that would sound plausible, and he failed. Who says that in real life? Nobody. It's something you'd see on an advertisement for a cheesy porn site or something. Some hot man-to-man fun? He smiles and quivers his lips. That was it. I said, "Nope, I want to go. I'm leaving." He said, okay. I quickly walked past him as he flattened himself against the wall to avoid me, and I noped right out through the living room dissection area and through the kitchen to the back door, which was thankfully still not deadbolted. The keys were still on the counter, so I let myself out to the door behind me. I deliberately walked, not ran, to my car. Looking back at the building, I could see that indeed there was a window facing the backyard area from the paneled room, but of course it was covered up from the inside. Dude was shutting and locking the back door. And I left, heart pounding, skin icy cold, thinking, holy fuck, what was that? So, was this guy some kind of killer? Or was he just an awkward closeted gay guy with access to a sterile looking apartment with an autopsy mortuary table and the windowless room that locks from the outside with a chair and a phone and no light switch? It's clear to me that the poor soul who walks into that room and gets locked in, he probably shuts off the light from somewhere and calls the phone. Other than that, it's anyone's guess what happens. I assume the friend of the judgmental person who emailed me must have been some kid that got locked in for whatever game ensues. Driving home at first, I thought of course I have to call the police and tell them what's in that place. But thinking it through, I realized I didn't have any crime to tell him about. I went to meet a man for casual sex, and what? He has a room with a chair in it? He has an exam table? The police aren't going to do anything with that story. The guy didn't touch me or do anything to me, and I left. I considered calling for an anonymous tip line, but again, what exactly would I report? There was no actionable crime. Also, keep in mind that at the time, while the local police in the city were pretty decent, they weren't especially interested in getting involved with helping the gays. They'd prosecute actual crimes if it was cut and dry, but I'd heard plenty of accounts of them not choosing to follow up cases where there was not an easy arrest to be made. I decided not to report anything because nothing would come out of it except drawing unwanted attention to myself. Even in retrospect, I think that it was probably the most rational choice to make. If this happened today in 2020, the law enforcement would probably be a lot more interested in it, but back then, not so much. So live and learn. I still drove past that house once in a while in the normal course of life for several years. I'd pay attention to how it looked. The vertical blinds were closed for maybe 5 or 6 years whenever I passed. Then eventually the blinds were down and there were decorative curtains in the window, so I assumed the place was eventually sold to someone who actually lived in it. Around 2002 or 2003, there was a murder of a young man on the news. He'd been found in the next state, which borders on my city, so it's not very far away. I recognized the guy from the gay community, but didn't know him personally. A friend mentioned to me something about the local serial killer. I said, "What?" He explained that a few young men had been going missing over the past year, each after being at one specific dive bar and being found several miles to the north past the state line. He explained that a few young men had gone missing over the past year, each after being at one specific dive bar, and each being found several miles to the north past the state line and out in the country. The case on the news matched up with the MO. My friend told me that the young guy had been at the bar and left with someone that night that he disappeared. The news report didn't mention anything about a gay bar or similar recent cases. I had to wonder if my acquaintance from the internet had anything to do with it. The location of the murder apparently was nowhere near the duplex, at least according to the story I was told. I never heard of a resolution to that murder on the news, or any official mention of a suspected serial killer other than some gossip.